Hello. Hello, and welcome. I'm Mehran Khalili. We are DM25, a radical political movement for Europe. And this is another live discussion with subversive ideas you won't hear anywhere else. And tonight, we're looking at the election of Zohran Mamdani as New York's mayor, the city's first Muslim and first South Asian mayor, and its youngest in more than a century. But this election is notable for a few reasons. First, Mamdani is a self-described democratic socialist who won on affordability, freezing rents, expanding childcare, making buses free, and piloting city-run grocery stores. He ran a hyper-local campaign focused on ordinary citizens in New York, the global capital of billionaires. He held a clear pro-Palestine stance in a city with the world's largest Jewish population outside Israel. And he beat the heir to a political dynasty, despite having heavy spending against him by billionaire-funded groups, and with many top Democrats slow to endorse him. So what could this astounding victory mean for the left, not only in the US, but also in Europe? How radical is Mamdani's program really? And will he be able to deliver? To answer all this and more, I'm very happy to say that we've got with us Richard Wolff, the economist, professor, co-founder of Democracy at Work, a resident of New York, and someone who has a lot of experience with mayoral races himself. He ran for the city of New Haven, Connecticut a while back. And of course, we have our own Yanis Varoufakis, who needs no introduction. And we've got you out there. If you've got thoughts, comments, rants, anything you want to throw at us, then please put them in the YouTube chat, and we'll put them to our panel. Rick, let me start with you. What does this victory mean for the left and in the US and in Europe?
Well, it is a many-layered thing. It needs to be understood in stages. So let me begin with one. On one level, this is like a bear coming out of hibernation. It is really the arrival, the return, because it's not the first time, it's the return of socialism as a significant, serious part of American politics. You know, I was born here, even though my parents are Europeans and I speak European languages, but all my life, having been born here, I labored under the Cold War and all of its consequences. And those meant that socialism was handled as a horrific, disastrous, evil, foreign emanation from the devil. I am not exaggerating. At every turn, socialism was banished as beyond anger, beyond contempt. For most of the last 75 years, if you were a socialist and did not disavow the label, you were thereby committing political suicide. That changed in a very important way with Bernie Sanders in 2016. Absolutely, and everything, including Mr. Mamdani's victory, has a debt to Bernie Sanders for what he did against the advice of many. What Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez and her associates did a few years later, entering Congress, was another step. But those were not the big ones. Mr. Mamdani's victory is a very big one. And so it's another step, like the earlier ones, but its very size, plus the fact that we now have Sanders, Ocasio-Cortez, and Mamdani, it's one of those moments that Marxists will enjoy, or Hegelians, in which the quantity becomes qualitative also. And so the return of socialism, and I'm going to give you one or two examples of how it plays out. In one of the last statements of President Trump, warning New Yorkers not to vote for Mamdani, threatening that if they did, he, that is Trump, would not allow him to take office. Those are quotations. I didn't make this up. And Mr. Trump has no authority to do any of that. But he said so. In the course of saying so, he referred with as much rage as he could pump up into his face that Mamdani, after all, was a socialist. And then, very important, he corrected himself. He said, no, not a socialist. He's a communist, which in the American mentality is even worse than a socialist. Mostly those words are used synonymously in this country and have been for a long time. But in order to make the statement that's even worse, he did something he didn't understand. He allowed that socialism wasn't so bad because you could be worse. You could be, oh my goodness, a communist. The fact that Mamdani isn't a communist makes no difference to most of the American audience. Because, as I said, they use these terms as synonyms. Because for 75 years, it didn't make a difference in American conversations for most people. There was always a small left. Okay, so the first thing I would say about the importance is that it puts socialism back on the map. Already in the local press here this morning in New York City, where I am speaking to you from New York City, there was a news story in which one of Mr. Mamdani's associates, another local politician here in New York, who's also a socialist, announced that he may run to become a leader of the Democrats in the House of Representatives, challenging Hakeem Jeffries, who is now the person in that job, and a person who did not endorse Mamdani, even though they're in the same Democratic Party. So you can already see other socialists deciding to run. And I would guess that in the next year, that a year from now, if we have another conversation, we will be talking about many socialists running all across the United States for all kinds of offices. That's how important this breakthrough is. Number two, what kind of socialist is Zohran Mamdani? Well, I know his father, and I know the work that his father did. And his father is a very serious, accomplished, and deeply admired scholar. And I know, because the first book I ever published was a study of colonialism in East Africa, that one of the greatest books available in any language on that topic is the one authored by Mahmoud Mamdani, his father. He is as moderate a socialist as you can be. And that should surprise nobody. Because if it's going to return here in this country, that's how it's going to start. That's not what it's going to be when it reaches its maturity. But this is a new little infant trying to find a way to be alive in a society that is terrified by the word. And so he's treading very cautiously and very carefully. Bernie Sanders did exactly the same. Ocasio-Cortez, exactly the same. I mean, the details vary, but this is your opening, soft, manageable, non-threatening socialism. The billionaires of New York City really have nothing but their ideological backwardness to worry them. And those who have ideological commitments are worried. They are very worried, but not because he's going to tax them out of existence. A 2% tax on their wealth is not a serious problem for them. Wouldn't be, couldn't be. That's not serious. And that's not the basis of their opposition. So we will see other socialisms emerging. They're already here. Other aspects of the left have a place here in the United States. It's very marginal, it's very small, but it's there. And it too, in case you're wondering, is growing. It is bringing in new people. It is growing in a way it had never, for 60 years, it hasn't grown. And that's true everywhere. And it's true above all with young people. So it's a well positioned for growth in this country, and that everybody is stimulated and excited by what Mamdani did. I should make sure you all know he ended up with more than 50% of the vote, which means Mamdani got more votes than all the other candidates, and there were half a dozen of them, for mayor of New York City. His victory is total. As political things go in this country, that is an extraordinary achievement for someone that young, for someone that new in the political game, let alone for a Muslim, let alone for a socialist, and all the rest. So it's extraordinary what we have here. Uh, and it will open the door, it is already opening the door to other interpretations and understandings of socialism and Marxism and communism, all of which are being helped by this election at this point, because it is fascinating Americans who are friends, who are enemies, and everything in between. And now, finally, then I'll stop because I don't want to monopolize your time. Can he get things done? Well, the answer is yes, he can. Will he? I don't know. I don't know of anyone who can give you a clear answer to that. Can he do things? Yes. And what he can do, this is very important to understand, is he can draw on the experience of something that once existed in American history called, and in Europe as well, and beyond, municipal socialism. I mean, this is not the first person who's a socialist who becomes a mayor. As Mehran kindly introduced me, I ran for mayor in the city of New Haven, Connecticut, where Yale University is, in 1985. I ran on the Green Party candidate, and in my first election for mayor, I got 10% of the vote, even though the newspapers referred to me as the Red Green. So everybody understood what this was about. 2 years later, I ran for the city council of New Haven, and I got 47% of the vote. Had I stayed in New Haven, I think there's a reasonable chance I would have been the mayor, even with the notion that I'm a Marxist and things like that. Um, Local politics in the United States is not the same as national. It's quite different, works on a different level, much more personal, and much more shaped by do you know the candidate and what do you know about him or her, rather than the labels. Okay, now, last thing. The socialist can get work at least on the following two crucial levels: on the revenue side of the municipal budget, if you like, and on the spending side. What you have heard about Mr. Mamdani is mostly that he's going to regulate things, rents, for example, coming down. He's going to spend money on setting up grocery stores in what we call food deserts, areas of poor people who can only pick up packaged food and can't see a fresh tomato ever, and that kind of thing. To make the bus riding free, that's a spending issue because he has to handle the budget of running the buses, and a few other things. But those were mostly focused on the so-called affordability issue, that the city of New York has become too expensive for the working class to afford. That the combination of the salary or the wage you can get on the one hand and the prices you have to pay, starting with your rent on the other, is a squeeze that everybody feels. And he made the case that he really would be different. What he said, which was what he would ameliorate this problem, is not so different from what Democrats say. They say that too. And here's perhaps the last thing I shall say as a beginning. What got him elected, therefore, was not these proposals. Calling them socialist really is irrelevant. They have been the things that Democrats have proposed and advocated in the past, including Mr. Cuomo, his important alternative candidate that he defeated here. The population has been persuaded, and by the way, this is true across the United States, what I'm about to tell you, that the political people, the Republicans and the Democrats, are all crooks and liars. That is, the level of alienation of the people of this country from the political leadership is deeper and greater than anything I have seen in my lifetime. It is composed of an endless series of experiences each individual can relate to you. And if you give them a chance, they do, of how they have been abusively disappointed by the income they earn and the price they have to pay for everything, and the empty promises of politicians to do something about it who never do. What got Mr. Mamdani elected was that he had to show that when he said these things, maybe, just maybe, he could actually do something. And the irony, the wonderful irony, and you have to have a feeling for Hegel's contradiction to have such a lovely example. The things that made him unacceptable, that he's a democratic socialist and a Muslim and a young man with a beard and all of it, made him different. And that's why he won. He was so obviously different from the norm that when he spoke about what he's going to do, people said, you know something? Maybe he will. The irony, something very similar to that got Mr. Trump elected. Exactly. And the lesson here has to be to begin by seeing a certain commonality. What Trump does cannot and is not solving the problems he inherited. Therefore, he has to do endless theater, which we are all condemned to observe. Mamdani is now going to be tested. What is he actually going to do relative to the expectation that is so big? Because the risk for him, as I'm sure he understands, at this point is enormous, that he will be unable to deliver, for whatever reason, enough to sustain what he has begun by an extraordinarily successful campaign. So let me stop there and you take it where you want it to go.
Thank you so much for that, Rick. Yanis, I'd like to bring you in your reaction. Take it where you will.
Well, to begin with, I'm very happy that we have Rick back. Hi, Rick.
Hey.
It's wonderful to have you, comrade. Look, we are caught between two perils here. One is that we overanalyze what is a magnificent moment in history, in recent history, because, after all these defeats, we've been tasting defeat after defeat after defeat, and suddenly we have a victory, and we need to cherish it, and we need to, to use it in order to get rid of any kind of defeatism, of fetishism of defeats, because at some point after so many defeats, we of the Marxist left started feeling surreptitiously, subconsciously, that maybe our defeats are a sign of rectitude. Now we have to get out of that, and we have to celebrate Zoran's majestic victory. But then there is the other peril, that a peril which I was going to narrate more generally, but you, by mentioning his father, Mahmoud Mamdani, you gave me a focal point here. Now, you all remember, I'm talking to our audience now, not, of course, to you, Rick, the exuberance that we all felt when Nelson Mandela was out of prison. He won the election. There was this romanticism in the air about, the new emerging post-apartheid rainbow nation in South Africa. And there was a certain Mr. Mamdani, Mahmoud Mamdani, who came out and was critical of us for being so accepting of the notion that, everything was going to work out. And I remember that, I don't know whether I'm sure you remember that, Rick, but he warned that this bourgeois romancing of an important moment runs the risk of downplaying, downgrading, and underestimating a mistake that we were making at the time. Just because the laws of apartheid were being torn asunder didn't change the structures, the economic structures of apartheid. The economic, social relations of production, distribution, and exchange remained of the apartheid nature. And that was Mahmoud Mamdani telling us that. So, on the one hand, yes, we have to celebrate the majestic victory of his son. But on the other hand, as Marxists, we have to insist that, yes, he's throwing open the gates for socialists, communists, Marxists to start mattering again, to be presenting different programs in different municipalities, in different states, in different counties across the nation, the United States, in Europe, in Africa, and so on. But we can't afford to make the mistakes that we have made here in Europe. Because, when Bernie talks about democratic socialism in the United States, in Vermont, in Texas in particular, of course, this is, just a red flag. But here in the European Union, I don't need to remind you, Rick, but I need to remind our audience, it was the Social Democrats, the Democratic Socialists, that effectively bolstered the flimsy architecture of the oligarchy capitalist regimes of Europe. It was, austerity was not ushered in by Christian Democrats. It was ushered in by Social Democrats. Here in Greece, our whole nation was placed in debtor's prison by a party of democratic socialism, which used to be, like Mamdani now is, on the barricades and progressive in the 1970s. But by the time that it gathered steam and it became larger and it won elections and so on, in the end, it ended up becoming the greatest supporter and pylon of the oligarchy. Now, I'm not saying that this is what's going to happen to Zoran, but we have to find a way of a dialectical combination of celebrating his victory and also not being foolish, not assuming that free buses are going to change the world. Free buses are crucial for municipal socialism, but municipal socialism is only one small step towards challenging the capitalist relations of production, distribution, and exchange. I'm sure I don't need to lecture you on this, Rick, but we have an audience and I need to make this point.
Yeah, no, I'm in full agreement. I reserve judgment because I want to see what he is going to do. He has a very difficult job ahead of him, and I wish him every success. But I mean by success, that we too, we who are to his left, as he knows and we know, will have our opportunities also. That is a question. I do not know exactly how he is going to answer that question. Not that he has it all under control either. He can only do what he can do. The contradictions of the United States, which are extremely severe now, in a way that I have also never seen before. There's a reason this could happen, and it's not just that the socialists have come back, and not just that Zohran is a good campaigner, and all of which is true. It's also the problems of this society. It cannot solve one of the most basic problems. If you have a city of 8 or 9 million people, which New York City is, and you have more billionaires here than anywhere else in the United States. It is a concentrate of wealth. If you've ever come to New York City and you've walked around for a few weeks, you know what concentrated wealth can look like. Well, we are all here together. We concentrated billionaires and what? A working class that can't afford to be here to work for them
Yeah.
has to live so far, a typical complaint. We have to live so far on the edges of the city that the transportation cost eats into our crappy wages, so we can't even do it. Hence, by the way, why free buses ring a bell in
Indeed.
people's minds. It's not really about that little bit. It's about the symbolism, what it represents as being caught in a vice that the system. Well, people are furious about that.
Indeed.
People are
Indeed.
furious because we, as a generation, my generation, my children, I have two children, my own, and so I know, and I'm a professor, so I'm with people in their 20s and 30s all the time. They were promised as they grew up the so-called American dream. It's important to get across that's gone. And there's a very angry, bitter population about that. And it's not just the young, although they are disproportionately learning. There is no secure job waiting for you. It doesn't matter whether you have a bachelor's degree from college or not. It isn't. You're going to cobble together this job and that one, few benefits, no security. This is, but even for the older ones, particularly those that have been abandoned by the capitalists who left, who replaced them with machines, computers, robots, AI, is you've lost your job. You can't be in the factory because it's gone. You are now greeting people at a Walmart, which is a horrible job with no prestige, a lousy wage, and zero security. You can't deliver for your husband or your wife or your children with that job. And you have to face it every day. It's relentless. And the anger and the bitterness. I'm going to exaggerate now. Mr. Trump is our president because he articulates an endless rage. He is a
Indeed.
rage-filled man. We have in the last, just to give you an idea, we have in the last 4 months officially murdered, approximately 70 fishermen in little boats in the
Yeah.
Caribbean and the Pacific. Now, here's the importance of that. Those people are accused of being engaged in the drug traffic. No evidence offered, not by the president, not by the defense secretary, Hedgepeth, nobody, no evidence. They were not arrested, even though there are naval boats of the U.S. who could do that. They were given no evidence to refute, no lawyer, no judge, no jury, summarily executed.
Yep.
I want to make clear, inside the United States, where we have a monstrous drug problem, where people are arrested for being engaged, since the number engaged in drugs in this country is in the millions, we have plenty of practice arresting people in that. There is no capital punishment for them. That doesn't exist. Nobody is executed for being engaged in the drug traffic. But and why am I telling you? Because it passes with no notice. Very few leaders have said a word about it. I don't know how it's covered in Europe, but here in the United States, it continues. It's been going on now for about 4 months.
Mm.
It continues because there's no outcry at all. I
Yeah.
would argue for you, this reflects a level of bitterness and anger so that you're somehow, you want to hit somebody for it. And so the government is doing that as a kind of theater of substitution, which is what the whole government, everything that comes out of Mr. Trump's mouth is to show the people, I'm angry, I'm going to do something, I'm angry. And that's just a reaction to a political system that has reinforced normal capitalism, which unfortunately the United States, as a declining empire, no longer enjoys. So
Yeah.
it's a situation that is exploding everything, and Mamdani is also a step on that process.
And Mamdani, Rick, I think he personifies hope because he's tapping into this discontent,
Yep.
the same discontent, the same pool of discontent, as you said, that Donald Trump exploited. The difference is that he defeated the moneyman, whereas when Trump won, he brought the moneyman alongside him. Some of them to humiliate them, right? I mean, that picture of his coronation, it wasn't inauguration, it was coronation with the tech
Lined
lords.
up behind him, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they were there. It was
Yes.
like a Roman triumph. He was humiliating them because some of them had turned against him in 2020 and so on and so forth. But he effectively re-embraces them on his own terms, on his own terms. They give him billions as well through the various schemes that he has utilized together with his extended family. Whereas Mamdani won by fighting head-on the moneymen, both of the Republican Party, the MAGA Party, which is slightly different, as everybody knows, from the Republican, the standard Republican Party, and the Democratic Party.
Yep.
And he wins. This is why he's such a great hope. And this is why I'm so eager to see him do that which he said that he was going to do. And it was a great speech after his victory, where he said in no uncertain terms, the fight begins now. The fight against the oligarchy begins now. It's not, if you think that the struggle is over, you're very wrong. It is just beginning. And essentially, he used a phrase that hasn't been used since Roosevelt. Not so much in those very words, but effectively what he said is, I embrace and I welcome their hatred. And, and it's completely natural that they hate me because I'm going after them. Now that I think is a very auspicious beginning. It's a very good start. How it will progress, that's, it's not just for us to watch and savor and judge. We need to be part of it, all of us.
Would you let me cut in just for a second? Because I
Please,
want
go
to
ahead.
read some comments and questions from people watching live. And there's quite a lot of you. Sorry if I've missed anybody because it's been racing past. So athletically smart says, when considering his core campaign promises, rent freezes, free childcare, free buses, what are some of the pragmatic concessions that we can expect as seen throughout history? SJ Philosopher says, does Mamdani want to go beyond equality of opportunity, and liberalism, in other words, to equality of result? Robert Cox notes that the mayor of my little city near Montreal was powerless with a disagreeable council. The mayor of New York can do some things, but much can be blocked. And two more. Isa Amin says, there's a certain concern that Mamdani might be the same as Obama. He may come into power with leftist promises only to continue the neoliberal agenda. And Ndungu asks, Is there an exploration of how to deliver for New Yorkers without the tax increases that he's attempting to get from Albany? Do they have a plan B to deliver affordability? So maybe, Rick, if I can hand it to you, if you want to tackle some of those issues in terms of like how could he actually deliver on what he's promised?
The short answer is yes, he can deliver on his promises. I'll even go further. He can do it without raising taxes on the rich in the direct way. Indirectly, that's what he's going to have to do. But that would have been true for almost anyone. That you cannot squeeze a stone beyond a certain point. It still will not give you orange juice. And you can't squeeze the working class much more than you already have. Let me give you simply one example. The way the urban finance works, real estate pays a tax on the value of the property. That's how we do it here in the United States. So every city has an assessor, and the job of the assessor is to figure out what is the value of every property, every piece of land, every building, every enterprise, and so on. And then a rate of property tax is assessed to that piece of property, and whoever owns it must pay that tax each year. Okay? So, built into this crazy arrangement is a desire to let the maximum amount of time elapse between one assessment and another. Why? Because the longer you go, say 10 years, which was the norm in many parts of America, it means you're paying a tax on year one's assessment, not on year 2, 3, 4, 5. Even though it's higher each year, you tax on the assessment of the year during which the assessment was made. All right? How do you handle that? Well, you can have more frequent assessments, have them closer together. That's usually a decision well within the authority of the mayor or of the city council. And we have a city council that has already had socialist members. I should explain for those of you who don't know, there are already socialists who have been working in New York State and in New York City. So we have socialist state senators and we have socialist state assemblymen. Zohran was one of them, and as such ran for mayor. But he has already allies, which goes to a point Yanis was working toward. What Zohran has, and there again is quantity and quality, Zohran has the ability to threaten the billionaires with something no socialist had the ability to threaten them plausibly with, which is you better be careful how you deal with me as mayor, because I have enough comrades and I have enough influence and I have enough more comrades coming into force in the months and years ahead, which everybody knows, that you, if you don't give me a reasonable deal, have the risk that something much worse is going to come down the pike after you soon enough. I want you to understand that's already operating at the federal level. Mr. Trump's people are worried that the reaction, which was showed in the election last Tuesday, not just by Mamdani, but by the election of very normal, non-socialist, a woman in New Jersey, a woman in Virginia, some judges in Pennsylvania, the arrangements to fudge the number of representatives from California. You have a building reaction, and now the billionaires who are happy and are still happy to fund Mr. Trump. He is, after all, very good for them. But they are getting worried. They now have to be more and more careful that they do not build by their support of Trump the reaction at the end of Trump that could undo, if they're not careful, what Trump gave them. The big, beautiful tax bill, and I assume you all know, the
Yes,
first
yes.
thing Mr. Trump did was the big tax bill. That lowered the taxes on corporations and the rich. That is why, when he could impose the tariffs to hurt all of you in Europe, the American business community, by and large, didn't complain. And the reason they didn't was they had been given a tax cut first, and now the tariffs netted out. That was an additional tax for those who import, offset by the tax cut that they got a few weeks earlier, plus the added benefit that a portion of that tariff they can pass on in retail price increases, which is what's happening in our economy and is part of the unaffordability experience that so many Americans have. Why am I telling you this? Because Mr. Mamdani, and we need to hold his feet to the fire, is in fact in a stronger position than anyone at this point seems to understand, not so much by what he could do, but what might become possible that has to be planned for, including by the billionaire class. They may end up deciding, quite possible, to fight him even on the 2% proposal for wealth. By the way, it's very limited. It's people who have wealth above, I think, $100 million, which you're talking about, way less than half of 1%. So they are going to have to pay 2%, which of course means nothing to them and never did. Uh, but he can do much more than that because he represents the risk of where this can go. And that's why getting 50%, not just winning the race, but winning by so much more than anyone had imagined he could do, gives him a power that, well, let me put it this way. The number one political problem that now exists for the governor of the state of New York, a woman named Hochul, is that she has got to work out a good relationship with Mr. Mamdani, or else she loses.
Yeah.
And there it is. She's got to deal. She is as far from a socialist as you could imagine, but she has to come to terms. And she endorsed him first, and she's very careful with how she navigates because she's got a whole new problem. We have to, I don't want to overstate it, but we have to be aware that Mr. Mamdani is not powerless. He's not here, like a dog on his knee hoping to get the biscuit. No, 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 no. He wields real power, whether it is in deciding when to have the next assessment or how to mobilize already a sizable group of state legislators in the legislature of the state of New York that are either already socialists, thinking about it, worried that a socialist will run against them if they appear to be anti-mom. This is a complicated situation, much richer in possibility than the newspapers, at least so far, have understood.
A couple of points from me, Mehran.
Yep, go for it.
First, municipal socialism has proven around the world that it's a great laboratory for progressive experimentation with funding mechanisms that are radical and highly redistributive. So, when Ada Colau won the mayorship of Barcelona, even in totally non-socialist cities like the city-state of Singapore, there are good case studies of redistributive mechanisms. For instance, rezoning and reassessments, as Rick said. Or in the case of Singapore, they did something quite remarkable. They made buses free. And the way they did it was by planting an electronic tag on cars and charging them congestion charges and using those charges in order to pay for the free buses. So there are things. Also, when it comes to the municipal groceries that he has promised people living in the food deserts that Rick mentioned before. There are funding mechanisms. There are great examples of local municipal currencies you can create in order to keep value distributed and being changed within your municipality. And why would anyone accept these municipal credits, a supplier? Well, because they have to pay municipal taxes. And therefore, you create local liquidity. There are, I hope that Mamdani considers not just the straightforward advice that his bureaucrats within City Hall put forward to him. He's got to take those into consideration, of course, but he needs to look beyond to what rebel cities have done elsewhere. That was point number one. Point number two, we have already seen that which Rick mentioned, the panic in the White House, because they can see that they're not the only game in town. So far, they've been the only, the MAGA part of the Republican Party, they've been the only ones who have been harvesting the discontent caused by years of what we call neoliberalism since Reagan. Tax cuts on the one hand, the trickle up as opposed to the trickle down, the wastelands in the Midwest and so on. Trump has been the only, the Democrats, think about it. It was unbelievable. Biden and Harris were effectively telling Americans, celebrate, you're doing great. And then, Trump turns around and says, I feel your pain. This is carnage what you're going through. Vote for me and I'm going to counter that. Now, he now has a competitor as a harvester of this rage on the left, somebody who is not harvesting those votes in order to turn the power that they get, like Trump does, in support of the billionaires, but somebody who's planning to use it against the billionaires. And you can see that Trump or his people have been thinking very hard about that because they know. Rick mentioned the tariffs. Let's say that the tariff tactic works in the sense of Donald Trump's own agenda. What his agenda, if you read Stephen Miran's papers and so on, the whole point is we are going to bring jobs back into the United States, manufacturing jobs. There's going to be investment because we're putting up these tariff walls. So, Mercedes-Benz will have to come to the United States and invest, which is happening, by the way. But if this works, then the trade deficit of the United States is eliminated. But if the trade deficit of the United States is eliminated, then the capital that goes from German, Japanese, and Chinese capitalists back to New York to fund Wall Street, to fund real estate, will also die, because this is the flip side of the same coin. On the one hand, you have the American trade deficit, and on the other hand, you have the capital flows, capitalist profits by the foreigners who've been selling so far stuff to the American market. They are the ones that are keeping Donald Trump's mates happy and glorious, right? So he will have to. He knows he's going to have to choose between betraying his own clan, the realtors and Wall Street, or the working class. And he knows he's going to betray the working class. And there is Mamdani now, who is, fishing in the same pond, same pool of discontent, and who is not going to betray the working class. This is why, correct me if I'm wrong, Rick, 2 days ago, he came up with the idea, something that I believe that he intends to do or he's thinking very seriously of doing, that's Trump, sending a check of $2,000 to every family. He did it during the pandemic. He doesn't have the deficit phobia of the German Social Democrats or Christian Democrats or of the Clintonites, for that matter. He would never have come up with the idea of perhaps sending $2,000 to families around the United States unless he was really scared of Mamdani.
Yeah, I think that's very correct. And I want to give just a glimpse of American history to give you an idea of why that's perhaps more possible even than Yanis has sketched it to be. The last time capitalism crashed in the United States, which is a memory in American history, is the 1930s, the Great Depression of the 1930s. And I want to remind everyone that at that time, the American working class lurched to the left, not to the right. It reacted by joining two different socialist parties, a regular socialist party and a Trotskyite party, and then the American Communist Party. They were, all three of them worked, despite their many differences, worked together with the CIO, a whole new organization of labor organizing, bringing millions of people into unions for the first time. It was the so-called New Deal coalition. And to give you an idea of what that, which, by the way, by Mamdani's standards, would be called socialism. They didn't call it that because you couldn't in America at that time. Although many businesses accused Franklin Roosevelt of being a socialist, in case you didn't know. He had that all the time. What did he achieve? Social Security. We never had that before in American history. Unemployment compensation. We never had that before in American history. The first minimum wage. We never had that before in American history. And federal jobs for 15 million unemployed people, which we never had before. It was an explosion of what would in moderate terms be called all kinds of socialism initiatives in the society. And how was all of that paid for at a time of depression? By changing the taxes on corporations and the rich, which were dramatically raised. So the notion, can one tax corporations and the rich to have a program for the mass of people? American history has already answered that question. The question is, can we do it again? And that's always a very different question. So there's a lot of history that can be appealed to give the support and the momentum for doing this. And it's already happening. I want to make sure you get, over the last few weeks, as you all know, the American government was shut down. Okay, now watch what's happening. In the early weeks of his administration, he has government efficiency. It, of course, had nothing to do with efficiency. It was a way of saving money by closing down all levels of government at the federal level. And when that ran out of gas, he got a benefit out of that, cutting back expenditure. He shut down the government. Another way of not having to spend money, just a new theater, if you like, to cover it. The difference was that first the shutting down of efficiency and now the shutting down of everything impacted on millions and millions of people. Here in New York, the television carried stories about a week ago, or not a week ago, about 3 days ago, about the time of the election, in which the camera focuses in on a poor family, a woman taking her children to the local store to get sandwiches and using the stamps that are part of our food subsidy program, SNAP, SNAP, which services about 42 million Americans. And the camera focuses in as the storekeeper sadly informs her, because he's losing money, that he can't sell her for her stamps, which he gets reimbursed for. He can't give her children the sandwiches that he's been giving those children for years, every few weeks when she comes by. So everybody is tearing. The reporter is full of empathy. And the bad guy, Mr. Trump. Now, this is happening all over the country. You are producing levels of rage that are now not the opportunity for Mr. Trump to exploit, but rather the opportunity for the enemies of Mr. Trump to blame on him. Just as the tariffs give every leader, no present company, of course, excluded, every leader in the world a chance to explain his or her country's difficulties by pointing at the tariffs as having done the bad thing to the economy of fill in the blank. The effect for the United States, here's the irony. At the beginning of the Cold War, the plan was to isolate and contain the Soviet Union. Mr. Trump's policies are effectively isolating and containing the United States at the same time that he has to go after the working class to try to resolve the contradictions, just as Yanis outlined. You know what that is? That's a recipe for political disaster. And that's the course Mr. Trump is on. And one of the most important things we should keep in mind as we follow Mamdani is whether he can capture the gains, the externalities of Mr. Trump's self-destruction. If he can, he will be vaulted into a place in the United States which will make all of you have even more programs devoted to seeing how it works.
Guys, I know we're coming up to the top of the hour, and
you will
Richard, you
always
have a
be
hard stop.
welcome to be on these programs, Rick.
Well, I'd be glad to. You know, it is, if you don't know, my mother was born in Berlin and my father in the city of Metz on the French-German border. I speak French and German. I always have. I have one foot in Europe and one here where I was born, and nothing would give me greater enjoyment than to keep a dialogue going with Yanis and with all of you, in hopes that that might also help build your program and your project.
Thank you so much, Rick.
My pleasure, and I really mean that.
I really appreciated the time that you've given us. Thanks also to you, Yanis. What a fascinating conversation. Let me just read out a couple of final comments and questions from people in the chat. Jules, well, lots of people in the chat pointed out that in Europe, these proposals that are seen in the US as very radical are actually very normal to European ears, many of them. And Jules notes that in New Mexico, they also have free childcare. Christ, it's not that hard, they say. Someone else notes that the fascists pulling out the commie card is seriously old. I'd agree. Denise notes an important point, but perhaps for another discussion. Will Mamdani continue to mobilize his volunteers? Will they keep the pressure up or go home, job done? Tiago also asks a similar question. I think that's very important to see how that system and that structure will continue now that he's been elected. A couple of more cynical takes. Terry says, I wouldn't hold my breath on Mamdani. He didn't replace the chief of police, keeping the power structure intact. Crowded Teeth notes, I don't think it's fair to call Mamdani a socialist until he's much more explicit about a view of moving beyond capitalism. He may have held this view before the campaign, but he reneged hard during it. PSA notes, the old world is falling apart, as it must. What we're seeing now are the birth pangs. And finally, Prof. Axis says, Richard for president. So in case you're thinking of getting back into politics, Rick, you've got at least one supporter out there and many more, I'm sure.
That is very kind, but let me point to my smiling. I'm feeling good here in the United States, and that's an indicator too that a person like me should be feeling good about what's unfolding here.
Excellent.
Let's stick to this good feeling. We need it. We've been deprived of it for so long.
That's why it tastes so good. That's right.
We certainly have. Thank you. And for you out there, if you'd like to join DM25, dm25.org/join or /donate to donate to us. Thank you. And we will